So again, good morning, good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. Welcome to our webinar this morning. I think we've got a great topic, which we'll get into depth in here in a second, but it's going to be focused around industry awareness and the adoption of the EMV L3 testing framework. For those of you who have not met me before, my name is Jason Bohrer. I'm the Executive Director for the U.S. Payments Forum. We have a distinguished panel of panelists here, which we'll get into here in a second, which I'll introduce. Devin, if you want to go ahead and maybe move on to the second slide. Before we jump in, for those of you who have not had an opportunity to participate in USPF webinars in the past, is maybe just a brief overview relative to our mission in the industry. Originally formulated about 10 years ago to help address the transition to EMV here in the U.S. We are one of the largest cross-body networks and forums that is established here in the States to address payment technology trends and topics. So you can see that there's a variety of different things that we're addressing today. A lot of it focused around contactless transition, especially with everything that's gone on with the COVID pandemic over the last 24 months or so. It's continued even today in the petro, transit, and hospitality markets. Continue to work on things like what we're going to talk about today relative to testing and certification standards. But it's really morphed here recently around some of the other topics and trends that are ongoing in the payment space. So you see a lot around fraud mitigation. You see some topics there that we're addressing today, but it's evolved beyond just EMV and some of the contactless things, including identity and a variety of different forms and how that might affect the payment space, as well as some of the newer topics like digital currencies, crypto, blockchain, and you can see AI and a lot of other tools that are out there. So if you want to maybe move on to the next slide, Devin, the basis of our work is really formulated around 8 different working committees that all meet on a regular basis. Some meet twice a month, some meet once a month, some meet once a quarter, depending on the cadence and importance for that individual working group. But the work product that comes out of each of those 8 working committees is really the basis of the organization. So we do provide resources in the form of white papers. We have best practice papers that we end up publishing for a variety of different subjects. We're focused around education within the payment space, as we do have a variety of certification programs that we do also offer out there to the community. As well as just a number of different communications and networking events, as we do have, and I'll mention this at the end, we have one of our largest meetings coming up actually next week in Salt Lake City. So we'll spend a little bit of time at the very end to give you some insights on that. But all of this information can be found at our website there at the bottom, which you see uspaymentsforum.org. But feel free to reach out to either myself, Devin, or Danielle if you have any questions relative to the forum. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on and introduce today's panel speakers. You see we got a total of 8 total speakers today. Dave Blust from Discover has joined us this morning. Andy Patania from Elavon has joined us. Ed Perez, who's a regular in the U.S. Payments Forum with Verifone. Alex Pierre from Visa. Marc Regan from ICC Solutions. Clyde Van Blarcum from American Express. And Henk Van Dam from UL. Welcome to all of you guys. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ed, and we'll move forward with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out today to hear us talk about this new EMV L3 testing framework. So, Devin, if we can go to the next slide. Okay. So basically, here's our agenda for today. You know, we just kind of want to get a level set, just give you an idea what the goal is of this meeting. Then after that, you know, we'd like to kind of, you know, set the stage, give you some preliminary background information about this L3 testing framework. We then have, you know, a series of roundtable questions for our panel, a little Q&A there. Afterwards, we can jump down and just kind of look at some of the appendices or appendixes that we have attached to this particular presentation. We have some sample screenshots from the EMV test tool vendors, and also some definitions and acronyms to help familiarize everyone. And then hopefully by this time, we would have given you enough time to help formulate your own questions, because it's really important that we do hear from you all. And so we'll tackle like the last 10 minutes or so of our discussion here to review some of your questions and help best address those. So hopefully that will work for everyone. Next slide, please. So again, the goal of our today's presentation, as Jason suggested, it's really about education. And what we want to do today is that we want to bring awareness, right, to the payment space, to the ecosystem of the payments industry on the adoption of the EMV Level 3 testing. Now, this is going to pretty much replace how we've done things in the past. I think that there's a lot of advantages that we'll also touch upon. But nonetheless, this EMV L3 testing framework, it has the support of the participant systems, what we used to call payment networks. And we'll also, again, review its capabilities and its benefits. So if we can go to the next slide, then. Okay. So basically, the test tool, right, it's going to remain the same in most cases. So it's not as if we have to relearn or retrain, but if anything, just refamiliarize yourself. But basically, it's going to follow the same features and functions, if you will, that many have been using for EMV certification in the past. So the test case generation is what's going to be different. And that's going to be triggered by the fact that the EMV Level 3 is now going to be following the TSC, or test selection engine approach, following that type of format. So the bottom line here is that data collection is still going to need to be done, just like it is today when you are doing your EMV testing. So again, a lot of these steps are going to be more behind the scenes, if anything, relative to the EMV Level 3. But a lot of the stuff that one does today in preparation for EMV certification will remain unchanged. So if we can go to the next screen. Okay, so basically the test tools are going to now have, with use of the TSC, or the test selection engine, right? The test tools will now have a consistent and common file format for all of the major participant systems. So again, we have speakers today from Discover, American Express, Visa. Apologies, MasterCard could not make it, but nonetheless, I'm sure that they would agree with what the rest of our panels would say. So as we mentioned before, data collection is going to be the same. However, we believe in certain respects that with the advent of this new EMV Level 3, it's still going to require that acquirers and the processors and any other third parties, you're still going to need to get the same correct answers that you would normally do if you weren't doing the EMV Level 3 approach. But nonetheless, there are certain benefits to help us address that. So, of course, you still have to do your necessary due diligence. You have to make sure that the questions that are asked, the answers that are given, are going to still align with whatever EMV solution you wish to certify. So, so basically, we don't see any major need for any kind of major training. Again, if anything, just be familiar. Perhaps a couple of screens might be different, but again, the features and functionality that are normally inherent in an EMV certification will still be in place. So if we can go back to another, go up the slide, please, Evan. Okay, so here's some of the high-level benefits. Again, from a test tool vendor perspective, which we have representation here from both ICC and from UL, it's basically is going to streamline the process for the actual test tool development and the subsequent qualifications, meaning that with the standardized approach for TSC, when new test plans are changed, we should see some benefit and some efficiencies along those lines. For the users and the participant systems, AKA payment networks. We believe that this approach will improve data entry, in terms of automation, test execution, et cetera. And here's an important one. There's now going to be placed within the EMV L3 framework with these test tools, an ability to create some sort of logic in order to allow correct data to be entered. So we think that that's important. Again, if someone wants to, say that they're not going to do PIN, but then, they want to do a PIN test, that won't fly, because now you have inconsistencies, and we believe that a lot of these past criteria will be checked with this inherent logic. So there will be interoperability between the test tools with the common format. And not only that, but we also see that with the utilization and the adoption of the EMV L3 framework, that can put us into a better position to place a common intake form for all of the participant systems involved. Because right now, today, you have 4 or 5 different intake forms that you need to fill out. Many times they're asking the same questions. Now, this working committee, the Testing and Certification Committee, does have a white paper on this type of an approach, what we're calling the Common Intake Form Questionnaire and Terminology for EMV L3 POS certification. So I think if you take a look at that form, you could see how we've helped to identify what we think are about 30 or so common questions that can be entered once rather than entering in 3, 4, 5 times a piece. So we think that that's going to be a big benefit overall. We go to the next slide, please. So what is the EMV L3? What is it not? It's not a new test tool. So it's still the same test tool. You don't have to go out and purchase a new one. It's not a new level 3 certification process. Again, the same steps one follows today are going to be continued with the advent of the L3 framework adoption. And we do not see this as a large change at all for the end user tester. Some things might be different, but it's not completely different. But again, we still think that that you're still going to run the same test cases that you normally would have received. It's just a slightly different approach to getting the data in and how the data gets spit out afterwards for test scripts. Now, it's not a mandate, right? This was basically a suggestion that came from EMVCO about creating a consistent platform, if you will, for EMV certification. And so it is optional, but again, the participant systems all saw the benefit and all decided that this is something that they want to adopt as well. And again, I mentioned about there is no new intake process. However, it looks as if this could be an opportunity for acquirers or processors to perhaps, re-examine their intake process themselves and maybe use this as an opportunity to, help streamline or reevaluate some of those intake questions that are currently captured today. Go to the next screen. Okay. So basically, at this point in time, we like to go over a bunch of the questions that we have, prepared for our panel to address. And again, while we go through this, we ask all the participants here, if they could in turn, if they have any questions, please feel free to drop the questions here in the Q&A feature of this presentation. And at the end of our presentation here, we will review those questions and hopefully get to all, if not most, of them. So let's see what our first question is, Devin. So I guess the most obvious one is, why are these changes being made? And for that, I'd like to start off by asking Dave from Discover what his thoughts are on this.
Thanks, Ed. Dave Blust with Discover. One of the big reasons for these changes is just streamlining and trying to be on the same page with the other participant systems, the other brands, trying to make the inputs and the testing easier for our end users. We all have the same clients trying to test and certify for all 4 brands. And there was, we heard the information from our clients that, the intake process has been a cumbersome process. So, between us and the EMV code, trying to come up with better ways to make it easier and be quicker to market with our certification processes.
So let's see, Alex, can you add anything to Dave's comment?
Well, Dave pretty much covered it, but yeah, I can add that the framework in itself provides a very strong machine-readable foundation, and that's going to enable us to, the industry to build further automated processes on top of it. And yes, it's going to, in addition, the standardization provides more consistency for users when going through level 3 testing. So.
Okay, thank you. Clyde, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so being in the payments or testing space for quite a while, and for those that have been in it for a while, probably remember the card lock formats, right? Way back, they were all different for all the brands. Really with this, it's really about standardizing the data exchange and making it consistent across all payment systems is really what it's all about. To make it easier to implement, as Alex mentioned, set the groundwork for being able to automate more and more of these processes as we think about testing and certification. So that's really what it's all about, right? Making sure that things are consistent, standardized in their processes.
Okay, thank you. And I think Clyde's last comment is important, and it had one key word there: consistent. And I'm sure, like in today's world, in the payment space, we have all sorts of different things calling the same thing different names, etc. But I think that consistency, I think, is perhaps a big reason in many respects for these changes to be made, and I applaud it personally. Okay, Devin, can we go to the next question, please? Okay, so will the new L3 test plans have different test cases, or will it be the same, only using a different format to generate applicable test cases? So for that, I'd like to start off and ask Henk from UL some of his thoughts on this one.
Yeah, hey, thank you. This is Henk with UL. So the mechanism of the test plans, right, and whether they're different or not, is still with the payment networks, and I think some can add some on implementations that they're doing. But this is really only about harmonizing the data format and extending the approach of a TSE, a machine-readable format, over the payment networks, creating consistency in working and doing your compliance testing. So the harmonization in itself, the TSE implementation itself doesn't really impact the test cases. However, I do know that some of the payment networks did use the opportunity to also make some changes in their compliance requirements.
Thank you. Marc, could you add anything to that from an ICC perspective?
Marc Regan from ICC Solutions. So yeah, I mean, just echoing what Henk said, really, the level 3 test plans, whether they do or don't have different test cases, that's down to the brands and their implementation. Some of them have used this opportunity to combine that information and make one test plan with new test cases. Some have used it just as an opportunity to tidy up existing test plans and then have them, in this new format. A word that you will probably hear a lot during this presentation is that it is applying a consistency across the board and a conformity that all the brands are now using, as well as the test tools. So at the front of the tool, the TSE qualification that that all the tool vendors have to go through. There it is now embedded with some very clever logic behind the scenes that ensures essentially that the information that you're inputting into the tool is correct. If you do put anything incorrect into some of the questions, there's logic there that says this CVM cannot be deployed in this country. Please select one that's applicable to the region that you're testing in. So hopefully what it should do is reduce the amount of errors that are generated during test list creation, and it means that the user knows what's presented in front of them is what they need for that device in question.
Right, thank you. So again, I heard mention of the logic, right, which I guess is new, but in terms of the actual output, et cetera, it's not anything new that we have not seen before in prior test plans from the participant systems. So in fact, in many respects, Marc, would you agree that this change from the older way of our test plans to the newer way of the test plans with the EMV L3, that it's almost as if you're just going from one version of a test plan to another in that regard?
I'd say so. I'd say the logic that now's been applied just makes the experience more user-friendly as well. It makes it more human readable so that people can get to the end goal quicker and just understand what it is that they're actually doing easier.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. Dave, do you have anything to add from a participant system perspective on this?
Absolutely. So as Marc alluded to, some brands decided to do some updates, and Discover is one of them. We took this opportunity to actually combine 3 separate test plans, as we had the 3 separate networks for Discover, DCI, and Pulse. So we have now combined it into one test plan, in addition to aggregating some of the test cases all together. So instead of having one test case to complete one set of criteria, we might have combined that with another test case that, we have 2 or 3 different criteria within one test case. So we drastically reduced the amount of total overall test cases that we had available, hoping to, again, reduce the time needed for testing and quicker to market for our clients. But, one test plan now for all, and hopefully make it easier for all.
So it sounds like you've actually did a little streamlining with your test cases, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Okay. And Alex, from a visa perspective, anything that you could add here?
Yeah, so it's kind of what Marc was saying. So from a visa point of view, we took this opportunity to define a simple business-oriented level 3 testing questionnaire, which will be used to automatically select the applicable level 3 test cases. And we also took the opportunity to consolidate our test plans globally and rework the level 3 test cases to make them more granular. So yeah, and I think this is going to help with time to market and if there's an issue, with the troubleshooting of the test cases.
Great, thank you. Devin, can we go to the next question, please? Will I be required to use this new L3 certification approach? Well, I'd like to, start this off by asking Andy from Elavon, from an acquire perspective.
Thank you, Ed. So the bottom line here, and we've said this multiple times, so what we're talking about here is really a behind-the-scenes change. However, at the same time, the participant systems, the card brands have decided to use this opportunity to consolidate, to issue new test plans, new test cases, and which means, like it always does, if there's a 1.6 version that you've been using and now there's a 1.7 version, you're going to have to use the 1.7 version in the very near future because 1.6 will be deprecated. So eventually, yes, you're going to have to use this this approach that is being implemented by the test tool vendors and the participant systems. But it's all behind the scenes at the moment. that the test plans are, although connected, it seems they're really separate. The test plan updates are separate from the background of how it's done.
Okay. And Dave, from your perspective, from Discover, any care to comment?
We did recently at the end of 2021 put out a notice that, with the new test plan and with a date of the end of January 2022, that we would like you to use the new L3 format. If we did have any certification projects in flight with the previous test plan, obviously those testing entities can continue with that plan. So any new projects now, we would highly recommend and prefer it to be on the new L3 format with the new test plan. There might be some exceptions on a case-by-case basis, but that's between the testing client and their relationship manager to work with our certification team on how we're going to move forward. But our goal is to be using the new L3 format and test plan.
Okay. Let's see, Clyde from American Express. Can you answer this question?
Yeah. The approach is highly recommended, but not required at this time for American Express testing certification processes. But again, it's highly recommended, and we do support it across the board.
Okay. And Alex from Visa. I think you're on mute still, Alex. There we go.
Yeah, so Visa announced in January 2022 that effective 16th of July 2022, the Visa EMV compliant global level 3 test set files must be used when performing any new level 3 testing in all regions. Legacy toolkits, known as the US Quick Chip and Minimum Terminal Configuration ADVT CDET use cases, will be retired for any new level 3 testing. Visa will continue to accept US Quick Chip and Minimum Terminal Configuration ADVT CDET for level 3 testing that was performed prior to the effective date. So yeah, Visa strongly recommends using this time to transition to the EMV compliant level 3 test set files now.
Mm-hmm. So bottom line here, we're hearing from Discover, American Express, and Visa that yes, you will be required, but there's I guess an overlap period of time from existing projects that might be in queue today. It could be done the older way, but everything going forward that would be new, then one would be expected to use this new L3 approach, providing that your test tool vendor can support that. But in addition to that, I think that it's just a matter of time. And we didn't mention anything about MasterCard because in essence, they are using and have been using a test selection engine for quite some time now. So we can go to the next question. Now, what exactly is being changed? Now, let's see. I'd like to, ask Marc if they can describe some of the changes that are occurring in their test tool.
I think for the most part, you'll find that the use and look of the tools that have implemented this TSE structure to be very similar to what you're used to seeing in the past. Once it gets to the testing phase, the big change again is the consistency and the conformity across the brands and across the files that are being implemented into the tool. So essentially, the big change is going to be that initial process of where you're selecting what your terminal supports, all of the administration functions. All of that gets handled by the tool on a front screen now and answered depending on what it is that you're selecting or under test. Depending on what you select, then depends on the questions that are then shown and what you need to select. And, like I say, all of the background stuff that is in place is now very clever, and it ensures that not only the correct test cases are being displayed, but also the correct test questions within the test cases themselves. So in theory, as long as everything is implemented correctly, the user should always get test cases that are applicable to the device under test, and also test questions that are applicable to the device under test. And having worked with certifications for a while, we know that one of the big holdups is that when someone tries to debug a particular test case that isn't for the device that's under test. So hopefully this will streamline that process and just really improve the speed to market. But as far as general tool feel goes, I don't believe the user will see any impact in that area. If anything, all of the changes are for the better and just make the user experience a lot more easy.
Okay. And Henk, from a UL perspective, how would you best answer this question?
I have a little dry cough, Ed, but let me try. No, I echo what Marc is saying, right? It's very similar, and as providers of tools, we work and collaborate with the payment networks for qualification. So I totally echo what Marc was saying. I think to add to it that we both also had the opportunity with the payment network to improve the dialogue on the intake questionnaire a little bit, to give you a little more hand-holding in the simulators, meaning that certain questions require certain answers or limit you certain answers, and it helps you. It makes it less error prone, and it's another part of this implementation that makes I think life a little easier for those folks who are doing this L3 test and certification on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, can we have the next question, please, Devin? So what are the benefits for using the L3 framework? We kind of touched upon it earlier, but let's just see if we can, pull out something a little different. So if we can go to Marc, from your perspective, what other kind of benefits besides, I think we mentioned things about, inherent logic, to ensure that test cases are more in line with the goal of the project. But is there anything else that you could add to that?
I would say, along with the start process being easier, I'd potentially say that the end process is now made easier as well. Because the logic within the level 3 structure now is that the card logs have to be formatted within the level 3 format. The host logs have to be formatted within the level 3 format, and they all have to be packaged within a particular TSEC file before they're submitted off to the brands. So with that, the way that I believe the tools work is in most cases, you will finish your certification run, and then a simple click of a button, the logs will be reformatted, packaged, and that TSEC file and TSE file that's required to be submitted to the brands for certification is all automatically generated and filled in. So at that point, hopefully at the end of your run, it just increases your speed in that particular area. So I would say all the way through the process, it just improves and streamlines the process.
Clyde, would you agree that with I guess consistent file formats that are being submitted to your ATS, would you agree that you would see some streamlining benefits on your end of that equation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime we can have a consistent format, it allows for that automation I mentioned earlier, right? When you have consistency across the board, you can build upon that automation, like for card logs, do an automatic validation within the tool set, potentially, right? And all of those things. So that's really the big benefit across the board. And then interoperability between the tools, the host systems, as well as the card simulation tools out there. When you have that consistent format, allows anybody to use any tool and work with somebody else's tool. So we don't all use the exact same solutions. So having those different solutions, being able to communicate successfully is really a big win, I think, across the board.
Alex, what else would you see from your perspective of the benefits?
Well, without repeating what was already said, I would say that there's some common features also that we can start leveraging. So, for example, the common questions. So I think you didn't mention it, in the presentation, but this is something that with this framework we can start using. So, for example, there's some questions that could be that would be common across payment networks. So, for example, taking the level 2 LOA for contact. So instead of entering it X number of times, you would only have to enter it once. And well, for Visa, we are seeing this as an upgrade, a simple upgrade, and then it's going from a manual intensive process to a highly automated process, which would provide, which will enable us to provide faster response times when we need to update the test plan, so create new, add, or update some of them.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, Andy, from an acquire perspective, what could you add to this? You're on mute, Andy. Sorry.
Yep, I just saw that. We've said most of this before. It's consistency. It's human readable formats. It's just going to be a lot easier to do it this way, and by bringing everybody together using a common format in the background, it's a great time for acquirers, processors to look at their own process and determine if maybe there's something that they can use to help benefit from the new L3 framework.
Great, thank you. All right, Devin, can we see the next question, please? All right. Does an acquirer need to change their intake form and/or intake process in order to support this new L3 TSC approach? So, Andy, I'll go back to you from an acquirer perspective.
Yeah, a little bit of foreshadowing in the last question. So the key here is they don't have to change their intake form or process, but it's a great time to look at it and see if there isn't a way to help streamline their own process to take advantage of the new L3 format.
Okay. Marc, from a vendor, a test tool vendor perspective, what would be your best reply for this?
I think this is something that's just likely to evolve over time. Initially, the chances are that the intake forms will remain as they are today, and then once people get to grips with the new level 3 format, they will be evolved and brought in line with, the new format that sits within the level 3 tool. But I just agree. I just agree with what Andy's just said.
Okay. And Henk, is there anything that you could add to Marc's comment?
Not a lot, Ed. It's and I think it's what Andy says, right? It's an opportunity. It provides a little more capabilities to think about automation because your data format and being machine readable. But I don't think there's a need to do that. It's not required, but it's definitely an opportunity with this development. And also moving forward, I foresee that we will make further changes in the intake form and intake process in next steps.
Yeah, and Ed, before we jump to the next one, since Henk just said that, so we got a question earlier in the presentation we've been doing from Carl Smith. We mentioned the common intake form. Can I ask my fellow presenters here, mostly the participant systems, have you guys committed, have your brands committed to using that common intake form?
Let's start with Alex.
Yes, I'm assuming the common intake form is referring to the feature, you know, to have common questions. And yes, so we Visa will be. So we worked first at an EMV level on this, and we identified some common questions. And Visa will be adding these. So we've got an estimated date to add this in Q2 this year.
This year, huh? Okay, great.
Mhm.
Dave, from your perspective regarding the
So I
common
know
intake.
yeah, thanks, Ed. The questions have been taken back on our side and are under review. We don't have a definitive date, but it is something that we are looking at and trying to see how we can incorporate into our current questionnaire.
Mhm. And not to leave you out, Clyde, what are your thoughts on the common intake form?
We're probably at the same place that Dave's at. We are reviewing all the common questions, looking how we can best support that. But I would say in general, overall, we already to some degree support them. We just need to fine tune those things for the future.
Gotcha. Could we go to the next question, Devin? Is there any special training needed? So, Henk, what say you?
Yeah, it's a little subjective, right, for me to sort of say you do or not. But I don't think that the changes are of that much of an impact to people that do level 3 test and certification work today. And you need to get familiar with it. But I think that especially the fact that the concept and the approach of a test select engine test is around for quite some time. I think people will get very quick and easy familiar with these changes.
Okay. And last but not least, Andy, from an acquire perspective, do you foresee anything like that?
Yeah, I don't. I don't see that there's going to be a need for any special training. If anything, some of the training that we've had to do with our customers and vendors in explaining what a given screen or a given field means is going to go away, because a lot of the screens from the test tool vendors are changing because of this, and they're becoming more intuitive.
Okay, thank you. Devin, can we get to the next one?
So Ed, while we do that real quick,
Sure.
Dave with Discover, I got a real-time update for the common questions that Discover is looking to have that incorporated by April of this year.
Oh, lovely. So there is momentum building. That's good to hear.
There is.
Outstanding. Okay, so Andy, I'm gonna pose this next one to you for starts, and I'm an acquire to use the host authorization test simulator for L3 certification. Do I need to make any changes to it?
The changes you have to make are the changes you've always had to make, which is you need to keep up to date with the latest releases from whoever provides that test simulator, and just make sure that you're in line with the requirements that are currently in force.
Henk, from a test tool vendor perspective, what say you?
Yeah, totally echo what Andy is saying, and this is it's the discretion of the acquirer, right? Acquirer processor, but totally aligned. Yeah, make sure that everything is governed in terms of the test plans. But I think that's it.
Mm-hmm. And Marc from ICC, anything to add to that?
Just echo what the other two have just said. Essentially, I see it as business as usual. You know, if you got a test plan with new test cases in today, you would make them updates ready to run those tests, and this will work exactly the same way.
Okay. One more question, Devin, please. So will any existing output be changed? Clyde, I'd like to start off with you. Do you foresee anything like that?
Well, the outputs will be changed to the standardized formats. And really, that's the biggest change, right? So they can be exchanged, as we mentioned earlier, between like the card simulators to the host simulators. that information will be in a standardized XML or machine-readable format that can be shared.
Mhm. Hey, Marc, what can we say from a test tool vendor perspective?
Yeah, I mean, like Clyde said, really, it's just the conformity and the consistency across all of the brands now. And I guess it's not just about the brands playing nicely together, it's also the tool vendors playing nicely together in this area as well. I know that because we've got this standardized format now that, for instance, you can output information from one tool and then import that output into another tool if you desire it to do that way. So it allows that cross-checking between the tools now as well. Not only is the brand standard for formalized, it's also the same so that you can play nicely with each other in the tool area as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Devin, can we go to that first appendix then? Okay, so here we wanted to just show you, just give you some sample screenshots to kind of familiarize yourself with any potential change in the screens. But I'll ask Marc if he can comment on the first one. Go to the next slide, please, Devin.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just going back to what I said before, that the general feel of the tool should be quite similar to those who are used to using it. But the attached screenshot is just showing a little bit of the extra logic that is now in place and runs behind the scenes. So that top screenshot, you can see that SDA has been selected as yes, DDA has been selected as yes, and CDA has been selected at no. At that stage, there would be no further questions asked. The user will click next and you will go on to the next question screen. But just underneath that, you can see that if you actually select yes to CDA, that the tool actually then pops another screen onto the page immediately asking you what mode of CDA you support. So this is just a quick example of the tool then knows that because you've answered yes to a particular question, that there's another subset of questions that then need to be asked. And it just does that extra bit of hand holding for the user to make sure that they are directed along the correct path.
Thank you. Can we see the next slide, Devin? There's another slide from ICC as well.
Yeah, so just quickly on this one, again, this was just to show that anyone who's used the tool previously, that it will look and feel pretty much like they're used to seeing. Anyone who's used our tool will know that screen. And a lot of the pictures are there observational questions, so that's where a user would manually click yes or no. But for the most part now, the level 3 actually automates the answers and it does a lot of the hand holding for you. So again, you know, it just makes it a lot more easier for the end user to use.
And I'm sure that that's going to come out once we have a greater adoption of this, and we hopefully will see EMV certifications, you know, be reduced in their elapsed time. But thank you, Devin. We go to the next slide. Okay, so test tool sample screenshots number 2. This one will tee up for Henk. And if we could see the next slide.
Yeah, so we just have a few examples of, especially on the questionnaire, right, where we talked about where you will get a little more guidance, you will get a little more logic in the tool through a process that helps you answer the intake, make it less error prone, and I personally think that the intake is key in the compliance test process, because if you do your intake wrong and you find the test case failing late in the process, it's sometimes hard to track it back to the proper intake. So these are some examples of the questionnaire that we have here.
Okay. Next slide, please, Devin.
It sort of builds on it, right? It builds on it guides you here and there. It helps you suggest, recommend answers, but there's always the ability to make your own edits, right? To give the answers that are really needed. It is in the end, the discretion of the test and certification analyst to provide the exact information when it comes to this part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can we see the next slide too? Right there. And I guess this slide here just kind of underscores the inherent logic that you're baking into it.
Exactly. If you answer certain questions in a certain way, it might tell you, "Are you sure?" Right? That's more or less the. But there's logic built in. That is where the better hand holding, the better guidance comes in this process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Next slide, please, Devin. Okay, so here, folks, this is just, we're not going to run through them all, but just to kind of show everyone, we can go to the next slide, Devin. So again, these are some acronyms that might be new to you. They might be, out there for a while, but we just thought we would list a few of these things here. APTU, CDA, things of some terms that we've used during our presentation today. Go to the next slide. And we have a few more just to refresh everyone's memory. Okay. And then I think that's about it. I know we had one question regarding the common intake form and its adoption, and I think we've got some responses to that one. That yeah, it's coming. It looks like 2022 could be the year where we begin to really see some streamlined efforts. So fingers crossed on that one. Devin, do we have any other questions from our audience?
Yeah, Kashil, I can jump in there.
Hi.
Actually, Ed, is we do have a question from Kashil. It says, will the TSC also facilitate isolating test cases pertaining to some features only to be L3 certified? For example, if a solution is already certified on both modes, parentheses CT and CTLS, and the solution is adding support for handling the new Visa Fleet 2.0 requirements, would this trigger an entire card brand test L3 certification or just the fleet?
I'll ask Henk to comment from a tool perspective.
To be honest, it goes a little beyond my capabilities to answer this, but I would reckon that I don't know if the question comes from looking for a sort of a research, but I think that the concept of a test plan, whether it's regular or fleet, has its compliance requirements that need to be taken in account in the intake, and that mechanism didn't change, right? So it will still provide you with the test cases as applicable for managing it through your compliance.
Yeah, I can maybe jump in this one. I think what Kashil is referring to, it's some kind of delta testing mechanism that would enable someone that previously did the testing just to execute. If they're adding like a functionality, in this case it would be a Visa Fleet 2.0, or it could be 9-pin or whatever. Is there capabilities for delta testing? Well, I can answer from a Visa point of view. We don't have this capability in our tested files implemented yet. So if you do level 3 testing, you would have to, and you add fleets, you would have to. Well, if you never completed the contact and contactless test cases, the standard global ones, you would have to execute them. But it's something we can look into.
Right. It's just like in today, with today's testing approach, you can still, identify some of those unique test cases that you want to focus in on, like for example, for some regression testing, for example. That's what it sounds like to me. I see that we have another question. This one says, please, if you can confirm if it appears the TSC would be created now in Collis or the ICC tool, and by Collis, I suspect they mean UL. So Mark and Henk, if you could address that for your state of readiness, I guess, for the L3.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we're working very closely with the brands and those that are ready. We've got that in our tool ready to go now. We've been through the qualifications. So yeah, and I believe Henk will say similar, but I'll pass it over and you can hear it straight from his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. So we have it prepared and in place. So the minute these test plans come out in TSE format, they're available in the UL tool. Yep.
Okay, well, we've got 3 more minutes. I don't see any other questions coming in. So I guess we're in our end game of our presentation. Devin, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so again, here is some contact information should you have any other questions about the U.S. payments form or about any of the topics that we touched upon in today's presentation. We'd love to hear from you. We go to that next slide. Okay, so if you'd like any additional information from the U.S. payments form, here is some links that you can look into for EMV connection, contactless information, MDL information, MDL meaning mobile driver's license. As in addition to the U.S. payments form site that we mentioned earlier in this presentation, where you can find copies of other webinars as well as other white papers that the various 8 or so working committees have been able to publish to date. Go to the next slide. Okay, and then finally, and just a little plug for our spring summit meeting that's beginning next week, actually. But if you are interested, you can check out the U.S. Payments Forum, look up the spring Payment Summit meeting. This is going to be a combined summit between the Secure Technology Alliance as well as the U.S. Payments Forum. But that's all that we have time for today. I just want to thank you all. I want to thank our panel. I know you guys put a lot of work into this, and thank you very much for your answers and insight. And then for the participants, again, we thank you for taking your time out. Hopefully this was a nice, pleasant lunch and learn for most of you folks if you're on the East Coast, or at least a coffee and a Danish if you're on the West Coast. But nonetheless, again, I want to thank Jason and Devin and Danielle from the U.S. Payments Forum for helping to set this up. But on that, that's all we have for today, folks. And again, thank you very much for your time. And we'd love to hear from you if you have any other questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Is just a reminder too for everyone is we do plan on posting a recording of the webinar on the U.S. Payments Forum website that should be up no later than Monday of this coming week. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. But thank you again, Ed. Thank you to the panelists as well.
Okay.
Everybody have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
folks. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.